I'm late. I'm late for a very important date with my Squirrel Squadron community. Hi, everybody. Apologies for running a couple minutes late. I bought a house yesterday. My 14th century house here, 15th century house is too new, too modern. So I bought a 12th century house yesterday. And I'm a bit scrambled since that. So if I sound a bit off the wall or doing a bunch of things, that's because it really is a mad time here in the world of Squirrel. But what we're doing today is not talking about houses, but budgets, and not about budgets in 1172, but budgets in 2025. Because what I'm going to talk to you about today is a number of techniques for making sure that, at least in technology, but actually everywhere, you don't need to do a ton of detailed budgeting, spend weeks and weeks and weeks planning out your entire year. Because guess what? Here's the secret. The year is not going to go that way. The things that are going to happen are going to change your budget so much it may not be worth planning it at all. So that's our topic today, and I'm glad to have a number of you with me. Please give me a little comment in the chat, wherever you might be, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. Let me know what your questions are, what brought you here. I have a number of questions that you guys submitted before coming, so I'm going to work through those. Actually, this is going to mainly be a Q&A session because you all had so many good questions that after I give you some basic material, I think I'm going to be able to run through those and really cover some exciting stuff. But those of you who are here get to be first in the queue. So tell me, what brought you here? What's the most important topic for you? Are you in the midst of some detailed, horrendous spreadsheet-based planning, and you're thinking, how could I get out of that? Or are you really struggling to come up with a roadmap for 2025, and you're saying, how on earth could I do this without all this detailed planning? Or maybe you love detailed planning. You're a project manager, and you really want to make give as much detail and as much comprehensive information as possible, and maybe that makes sense in your world. I would like to hear that, because I think there are some places where that makes more sense than others. So I'd love to hear all that. Please put it in the chat. Let me give a really brief introduction for people who might not know what the Squirrel Squadron is. You just came across me and I'm chatting on the screen. You don't know what's going on. People who watch this on the recording. So we have people signed up from, I don't know, Australia, West Coast, United States, all kinds of other fun and exciting locations. And they might be watching on a recording if this isn't at a good time for their time zone, or they just have something else to do. So I'm Squirrel. I run something called the Squirrel Squadron. I also do consulting for hundreds of organizations around the world. I think I'm up well over 300 nowadays, after about a decade of working with loads and loads of different technology organizations, sales organizations, coaching CEOs, you name it, I do it. And what I do in the Squirrel Squadron is I give back, and it is my free community. We're closing in on 3,000 people now of tech and non-tech executives, people who are leading organizations, who are leading teams and driving them to do new and exciting things, but they find it frustrating. And they have problems and they have challenges as they do that. And we share those challenges. You know, we had a great discussion just a week or so ago, which involved people in Europe and some people in Australia exchanging ideas, coming up with notions, discussing how they were doing things. And that's what we're doing around the world all the time on the Squirrel Squadron. Laura has a nice little scroll I think she's going to put up. She's my community manager. She makes everything actually work. She gets all the credit for making everything happen. And we have a number of these types of events, which we haven't got up on the website yet. So that's my fault. You know, my excuse is I bought a house, but that's not a good excuse. I need to do better. So we'll get those up on the website soon for you to sign up. But they're free events every week, typically on a Thursday, often live streams, often Zoom calls, sometimes in person. And I'm hoping to come back and do another world tour and get to meet a lot of you in person as I did in November. And so lots of interesting topics. You can see them there on the screen. There's also these vigorous discussions on the Squirrel Squadron forum. So you don't have to wait for an event. You can go ask a question, participate in a debate, understand better how tech can be super profitable for you. That's our goal. Whether you're a tech person and you know everything about code and Kubernetes is your best friend, or you're a technophobe and bits and bytes are not your thing and you don't understand it, but you use it, because we're all users and we all want to find out how to make more from the huge investments we make in technology. So that's all about the Squirrel Squadron. Would love to see you at one of our events in 2025. See questions on the forum. You know, we were discussing outsiders in art There are people who we had this great topic that came up for me where I was seeing some people in software who were very similar to these outsider artists who make insane, novels of 15,000 pages with beautiful illustrations of crazy things that make sense to them. And they operate outside the boundaries of normal artistic feedback and galleries and funding and so on. They just make their own stuff. And there are engineers who are like that. And some of them may work for you. And they're really hard to manage. What do we do with those? So those are the kinds of things we're discussing. If you have some crazy engineers and you're trying to deal with them, or you'd like some more craziness in your technology team, that's a topic we were discussing just the other day. Now I can't tell who this is. Nadja, I think might be. Just attended an interesting course on beyond budgeting. Excellent. That's one I'm just going to cite in a minute. Interested to hear my thoughts on it. I definitely know of it. It's right here in my notes. So I'm going to comment briefly, but you probably know much more than me, Nadja. So I'd love your comments as we go. Do I know of similar ideas? Yes. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. Things that build on the same kinds of ideas, but go in slightly more technological, slightly more even a little farther than what's in Beyond Budgeting, if I remember it correctly. Been a while since I read it in detail, but I'm certainly commenting on it here today. So Nadja, ask me some questions as we go. Right, Laura, can I ask you to take the scroll off? I don't think we need to distract people with that right now. And also, Nadja brings it up. Could I ask you, Laura, just to help us out, could you stick a link to Beyond Budgeting? It's a book, the Amazon link or Goodreads or something, just so if people are interested, they following along in the chat. This would be a good piece of Christmas reading for people. I'm not going to start there, but I'm going to come back. So if Laura could stick that in the chat, that would be very helpful. Right, but where I am going to start is with an innovation center. So for my sins, at one point in my consulting career, I got roped into working in a thing called an innovation center. There was not a lot of innovation happening in the innovation center, I'm sad to say. It was for a big bank. It was a big bank that was headquartered someplace away from London where the innovation center was, and that's all I can tell you. A few people in the squadron know what this was. Please don't put it in the chat. I don't need to embarrass myself or them. And if you were there, I'm sorry. And, I hope you've moved on to better things. I think most of them have. But for those of you who weren't there, most of you, the main thing to know about it is that it was very focused on a particular type of budgeting and encouraging innovation through an innovative funding model. Wasn't very innovative. What they would do is there were a bunch of little teeny startups, little teeny groups within this innovation center inside this big bank. And the theory of the bank was good. The idea was positive. And so what they said was, we'll get these little folks doing their own thing, and they'll do lots of little experiments. Good. I'm in favor of small experiments using technologies. Really good way to improve your technology. And when they do experiments, they'll report back to us at the bank, at the home country, far away in some other land. And I'm in favor of that too. I'm in favor of accountability, giving an account saying, hey, this is what I did. I spent your money on this thing. Here's what happened. Success, failure, I don't care. Give some kind of account so people can make a decision and do that rapidly and effectively. It was the rapidly part that was missing, because only every few months, would the committee convene. It was an all-powerful committee in the faraway land. And the committee would convene, and they would decide whether and which ones got to move to the next stage gate. And somebody had defined these careful stages, and everybody had to fit into these stages. If your startup was discovering that actually there was a market in a totally different place that wasn't where you started, that wasn't so good. That meant you probably wouldn't get funding. So people would not try to innovate by moving into a new market. They try to prove the theory that they had originally. Tends to be that it's not right, that your theory about how people will make money from new technology or greener lending or something like that, whatever they were innovating in, you turn out to disprove your hypotheses pretty often. And so therefore you didn't get budget. And that was not a good reinforcement. What happened was that people were very constrained and were less innovative. They weren't trying new stuff. They were trying to conform and keep in touch with keep in line with the stage gate model. And the other bad thing about this is just how infrequent it was, because you'd have to wait months before it was your turn to go up in front of the committee and get more budget. And the problem with this is that you were kind of rigidly stuck in a process of repeatedly getting more budget or not. And if you didn't get it, you were out the door, and you had to get a new job or something. So the problem with this kind of model, and I think a lot of you are probably in this kind of model, you're working this way, whether you're inside an innovation center or in a bank or a company of any sort that assigns budgets on a periodic basis. There's some process by which you come and say, could you please give me some more money? Could I please do a little bit more? And it's over quite some period. Some people do budgeting every quarter. Some people do budgeting every 6 months. Some people do it every year or every 5 years. And the problem with that is it's just not flexible enough. And this is, if I remember right, not just going to correct me, this is the point of the book that's in the chat now. Thank you, Laura, which is called Beyond Budgeting. The problem is that in the modern world, where we have a lot of doubt and uncertainty, something called the complex domain from a sort of sense-making framework called Cynefin, when we're in that complex domain where we don't know what the rules are and we don't know how things work and we discover that our hypotheses are wrong, trying to make a budget now for what's going to happen even in a month can be absolutely absurd, because suddenly what we need now is not at all what we need then. The types of skills and knowledge and abilities that we need in our team and the costs of those things and the estimates for doing them are totally different after a month of actually encountering users, after a couple of months of actually being in the market and seeing who wants to buy what we have. And many of you know this because you observe your software teams, or you use software and you say, oh, I don't know who built this. And then you come back a few months, oh, they've changed it completely. That's something that's really different and better. What happened in the intervening time? Somebody listened to their users. They understood what things needed to be changed. Problem is, your budget doesn't adjust that fast unless you design it to do so. And that's what we're going to talk about. So now my worry is, before I get into what alternatives there are, what could you do that isn't making a budget once a year or having these stage gates where your money is kind of dribbled out to you only if you do certain things that are way too rigid. The problem with that is a lot of organizations aren't ready for that. And although there's this great book, a lot of people read it, not many people implemented it or anything like it. So a lot of us are still in this kind of environment where we don't feel like we have a lot of control over what our budgets are. Many of you are executives, CEOs, CFOs, CTOs. Maybe you could make some shifts, at least in your area, so you function differently, but you may be beholden to a board. You might be beholden to a process. You might be part of a larger entity, and you're stuck doing a different type of budgeting. Remind me, I want to come back to that and talk about some ways to get a kind of localized version of what I'm going to talk about. But to start with, I'm going to pretend you're the head honcho, you're the big cheese. You can decide to run your company differently, where your organization will budget in a new way. How the heck are you going to do that? I will just warn you that it's possible that people elsewhere in the organization won't believe you when you tell them this. I will just tell you the sad story of Cassandra. Cassandra is a character in Greek mythology, and she had a curse. It was quite a terrible curse. She could predict the future. She would know that something bad was going to happen. Oh, your house is going to flood. Get out. But her curse was that no one would believe her. Oh, no, Cassandra, you're always saying bad things. Then the house would flood, and still people would not believe her. And she's famous for warning the Trojans about the Trojan horse. And maybe that horse is not so good. I think there's something bad going to happen. And oh, no, Cassandra, we never believe you. And guess what? They lost the Trojan War as a result of not listening to Cassandra. So don't feel bad if people ignore you and aren't ready for some of the ideas I'm going to describe. That's pretty typical. But look to the squadron, ask me some questions. Let's see if we can figure out a way to help you to at least make a local version or to get some more traction inside your organization to work differently. There's some proof points that you can give. So I want to contrast two ways of getting from one place to another. I talked about this in London when I was doing my Starship Tech strategy. You can find the recording of that on the forum. There are two real ways to get around the solar system, and they have a very close relationship to budgets. So if I want to go to Mars, one of the things I can do is get my friend Elon Musk and get him to put me in one of his Starship spaceships. You're not quite ready to go to the stars yet, but that's okay. Get in one of those. Now, I better bring a lot of books, because when I get in, Mr. Musk is going to program it and make sure that it's all going the right place and it does exactly what it's supposed to, and it's going to get to Mars, and he's going to press a button, it's going to light up, and it's going to take me to Mars. Because I don't have much to do in between here and Mars, it's pretty much on a firm path. I can do a burn in the middle to try to adjust my path. I can go slightly differently. I can go a little, slightly different latitude on Mars or something like that. But I'm pretty committed. There's not much else I can do. And that's what a lot of budgets assume technology and other projects are like, that we're going to do a set of things. We're not going to change them along the way. It's going to fit to a sequence of events like stage gates. And when we're all finished, we will have spent all the money and we have got all the value, and it's great. We can then go to another planet, right? Refuel and go somewhere else. But the path isn't going to change. Now, there's something else, because that's really boring, right? I need to bring a book. If I'm going to write a movie, or if I'm going to have an exciting teleprogram about some characters who travel around in space, I don't put them in a rocket like that. That would be the most boring television program in history, is a bunch of people stuck in a rocket. What would be much more interesting is if you could turn around and go someplace else. Something else could happen. I ask audiences when I'm interactive with them, I'll say, have you ever watched Star Trek? How do they all start? Well, they start with a captain's log, but they also start with something different happened. We were going to Beta 97, and we changed our mind, and we went to Ganymede 92. In another star system, another place, because we got a distress call. Something happened. And that means that they change what they were going to do, and something exciting and interesting happens as a result of an event. That's what happens all the time in the complex domain when you don't know which way you're going. And technology is particularly susceptible to this. Happens in sales as well, right? We all had a big change of direction when COVID came. Nobody predicted that, or at least we didn't. A lot of people didn't. So we weren't prepared. We didn't know we'd all be stuck at home. And suddenly all our plans went in the toilet. We had to go a different direction, had to go to a new planet. Now, of course, unfortunately, real starships don't exist, right? We have Mr. Musk's, and maybe he can get us to Mars, but we don't have something that will allow us, as we're flying around the solar system, to change our minds halfway through. It just costs too much fuel. But we can in our technology and our other budgeting and planning processes. And so I'm a big fan of techniques and models which allow you to change your mind as you go. And that means your budgeting is different. So again, you can find more of my material on how to do this on the forum. I'll point you to posts about elephant carpaccio and glide path management. I may get into the glide path method in a minute or two here. There's lots of different ways technically to be changing direction as you go. The point for budgeting is that you want to make sure you have an overall direction, you have an overall budget, and a lot of accountability during the process. So instead of closing your eyes, reading a book, waiting until you get to Mars and saying, hurrah, we got to Mars, thank you, Mr. Musk, you say, we're a little ways, we're part of the way. Is this the right direction? Has something else happened? Oh, actually, we found another direction to go. Now we found another direction. Oh, now we're headed this way. Now we're landing on this planet. And if you have that level of flexibility, you are able to get much more out of the pounds or dollars or drachmas or whatever it is that you're spending, instead of relying entirely on the planning that you were doing months and months ago, which was before the things that changed in your environment. So here's something for you to do in the chat, if you don't mind. What are some things that changed recently in your environment? What are some unexpected events? I said COVID because, of course, we all know that one. That affected everybody. But let me just take a couple that affected my my clients. So in the artificial intelligence world, I have a client who is dealing with production of, let's say, videos and things of that kind, entertainment of various kinds. And some big players entered there. And they started creating videos and artificially produced material these guys didn't expect, and they had to adjust to sudden new competitors. That might have happened in your environment. Let me think of some other examples. So I have a client who is selling to big financial institutions. And they found out that the big financial institution that they were selling to suddenly had a change of direction itself. They had some new things happening, had some new influence in the buying process. Suddenly they didn't want to buy the thing that they had bought from these guys. They wanted to buy a different thing. So suddenly a customer had a sudden change. There are lots of other things like this that affect you. If you go look back at projects, probably projects that didn't meet their budgets, what a surprise, you'll be able to name some examples of that. Whether you're watching me live or remotely, do have a think. Let me know in the chat if you're live here, what kinds of things changed. Nadja has one here for me. Nadja's very active. Thank you, Nadja. New regulation from the government, right? So the government comes along and says, yeah, you got to do things a new way. I've got another client, thanks for reminding me, Nadja, who's affected by exactly this. They've been going along for 20, 30 years, producing some software and providing a service to great big customers, highly regulated customers. They're very happy with the service, but suddenly those folks are now being regulated to check out what my folks are doing. So my client has to meet certain criteria that they never had to meet before because the regulator is leaning on the customer, saying, you better meet these criteria and check all your vendors as well. And that new regulation suddenly makes them do something different. Did they budget for that? No, they didn't know what was coming. And did the customers budget for it? No, they didn't budget for it either. So suddenly you have a sales opportunity. Hey, you have something new, and why don't you pay us some money for it? And they have a budgeting challenge. Suddenly they have to meet that need and actually be able to sell the better service. It's going to be a revenue upside for them, but it's also a sudden change and not one that they were expecting. And they weren't ready for it. They weren't prepared. They didn't say, oh, yes, this is something that's going to come for us. It came as a surprise. So they suddenly need me, and they want me to help them over Christmas with it. So this is the sort of thing that comes and bites you. It's the sudden need, it's the distress call from Ganymede 7 that suddenly tells you, hey, we need to turn our starship around and go someplace else. Now, that's a good argument, by the way, if you're feeling like Cassandra, if you're saying, oh, man, nobody's listening to me, this isn't going to work. You can take those examples that you thought of and cite them as you're discussing with people. Hey, I want to do my budgeting a different way, which I'm going to describe. And when I do that, I'm going to be able to roll with the punches because I'm expecting the unexpected here. I know things are going to change. And here are some examples where we got burnt. And these stage gates, these tools, these monthly, the annual budgeting rituals, they aren't helping us with getting the kind of flexibility that we need. And here's examples. That can be a very helpful way to get around the obstacles. So let me describe, again with a story, what a sort of super flexible budget feels like, what kind of estimations you do, how you come up with it, what does it look like. So, and my story goes like this. I had a very tricky technical problem in a team that I was leading when I was a CTO in the fintech industry, actually. And so we're building this software, and we had this terrible problem. And as engineers do, we debated it, and we argued, and we said, should we build it this way, or should we do it that way? Would it be faster to use that? Should we use these skills? What technology should we use? And everybody had an opinion. And a very, very wise person who's in our community, Andy Parker, stood up in the back of the room after about 20 minutes of this debating because we weren't getting anywhere. And Andy said, we're just trying to come up with an estimate here. We just want to know how much time we should tell our customers to wait for us to do this for them. And if we can't solve this problem with any of these solutions or something else we haven't come up with in this room, if we can't do it within 6 months, we should all get new jobs. Does anybody disagree? And we all looked at each other and we said, yeah, this isn't that hard a problem. One of these has got to work. We don't know which one. We're not sure how we're going to get to Ganymede 7 or Mars or wherever it is we're going. And we may have detours along the way. But my God, it certainly shouldn't take us more than 6 months. And we were out of there in 2 minutes. And I was very grateful to Andy that I got home on time that night, because otherwise we might have been there till 3 a.m, just debating and arguing and discussing. So I imagine you have many of these processes, these stage gates, these annual budget processes force you to have them because you're trying to predict the unpredictable. You're trying to predict the future when the future is absolutely uncertain, and you know it's uncertain. So the Andy solution is a very good one. And I would take the Andy principle, if you can, which is to say, what business problem are we going to solve with this initiative? I'll take a non-technical one just to illustrate, make sure we're giving different ones. So James says the UK budget, absolutely. The budget came along. We elected a new government over here. And, I hear some other large country that's across the ocean, they've elected a new government too. So in your country, there may be new government, new changes, and suddenly taxes change, priorities change, tariffs change. I hear that might be something somebody big might be doing soon. All of those kind of unexpected events happen, and those are exactly the ones you need to plan for in the way I'm describing, or it would be more effective to do that. So what you do is you define what the business problem is you're going to solve. So let's take an example I was working with recently. So I've got a client who needs to manage a number of, I'm trying to obscure them slightly. They need to handle an influx of demand. They have loads and loads of folks, and they operate in the US, so they operate in certain states. People in lots of other states are coming, please, 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 can you operate in our state? And of course, they have exactly this problem of the James refers to, if the government regulations change and there's a new administration, all this stuff. So there's lots of uncertainty in how they go into those new states. But it's very clear in business terms how to define what they're going to do. Our service will be available in Kentucky. It's not available in Kentucky today. After that, it's going to be available in Wyoming. After that, it's going to be available in Kansas. State to state to state. They need to go into each of these states because there's huge demand. And there's lots of revenue to unlock in each state when they can offer their service there. But they don't know enough, and that the situation is changing all the time. Squirrel, how can they possibly give any kind of estimate? How can they say when they'll get revenue as a result of the budget they're going to apply, and how much budget should they apply? The answer is apply the Andy principle. Look at it and say, with a senior and experienced people who've done this, good news for these folks is they've rolled into many states so far, so they have experience. They can say, oh, this state's kind of like that state. And if we can't roll out in that state in 2 months, with the level of uncertainty and the types of things they do in that state that regulate us and that affect us, we should all get new jobs. And if you can't make that kind of estimate, then you haven't got enough information about how you're currently doing the action. You may not. You might need to guess the first couple times. But you can take some kind of guess that puts a limit. So you're putting a time box and a budget box on top of, with your best information, the best that you have, on top of the individual steps you're going to take. And when you have that, then you have a nice limitation on how much you're going to do, and you can adjust how you do it. So these folks have a number of different services they can apply in each state. And guess what? They can say, instead of applying all 10 different types of things that we can do, this state's been much more difficult than we expected. We're going to do 2 of those services, not 10. And that means we'll have less revenue, but we're going to be rolled out in the state. And that will mean that we can build in the future, and we can hire salespeople in that state, and we can start to mobilize, and we can add more in the future. Doesn't mean you deliver perfectly to the outcome you're describing, but it's a business outcome. That's the crucial thing. And it's actually not even an outcome. It's a solution to a business problem, which has many different types of answers. For example, if you're building technology to go into new markets or to do a new thing, you might find that actually your technology doesn't work. So guess what? You hire some human beings to do the work. Now, that doesn't scale very well. It's not something you want to keep doing, but you can solve the business problem, and you'll probably be under budget if you do that. It won't be as scalable, but you will solve the business problem of not being in that market, not having that feature, not having that solution. So this is terrifying, by the way. This is one reason people don't do it, because what they like to do is pretend they have control. And you want that feeling of control. And if you can produce that feeling that I actually know what I'm doing and the world is predictable and things are not dangerous and uncertain, you feel better. Guess what? The world's dangerous and uncertain, and you don't know how things are going to work. And that's actually how it is. And if you can face that, and this is hard, this is where people may treat you like Cassandra and not believe you and not be interested. If you can face that and make these kinds of broad Andy-style estimates, then the result you'll have is that you can solve the business problem with a lot of flexibility, and you can assign a budget to it that is relevant to the business problem. For example, you assign a small budget to a big problem, to a small problem, a big budget to a big problem. And when you can work at that level, and there's a crucial piece, be frequently accountable, I'm going to come back to that in a second, then you have a very flexible but very effective budgeting process. So mechanically, what this looks like is you identify the business problem, say for 2025, but a shorter time if you could get away with it, and you say, all right, I'm going to assign this much to this problem, and I'm going to check on the progress every week. How do I check on it? I make sure that the team working on it comes to me with accountability. They come and they show, if it's a technological problem, they say, here's the next step in the business solution. We have 2 users who are excited about it. We need to have 1,000 by the end of the quarter. So we have a big ask. We need to get to more users. How can we do that? Can we get more resources to get in touch with more users? These 2, they love it. So we're making progress here in week 1. If you can keep building like that and with very frequent accountability using the tools that I was talking about before, I'll go into those in more depth if that's helpful, then you're accountable for that budget that you assigned. Maybe it was 3 months to get this piece of work done with a certain number of engineers. They're showing every week that they're making progress toward the solution of the business problem, not necessarily to building a certain set of features that are on some roadmap that somebody thought up on day 1 that have no relevance anymore because we discovered 5 new things, there was a new budget, and we have new regulations. So that's what it looks like. I have helped a bunch of people to put in place this kind of budgeting, this kind of model, and it is fantastically successful where it is adopted. Adoption is difficult, and we'll talk more about that. All right, let me pause for a second, and if people want to throw in questions, they're welcome to. I see Ryan has one here. The worst is when you request something to be added to the budget, but then it gets removed, and then you find out you actually need it, but the budget isn't there. Exactly, because you don't have enough flexibility, right? You ask for it in the beginning, and people say, you don't need that, Ryan. You don't need a data engineer. You're going to be fine. You have some smart data scientists. You don't need to clean too much of the data. Don't worry, the data will be clean. Data is never clean. Ryan knows this. So, you always need to make sure you fix it all up, and that's what data engineers do really well. If you had one, then when you need one, you would be able to call on that person and get help. If you had a budget that was more flexible, then what, in the way I'm describing, then you could say, in order to solve my business problem, I'm going to need this skill, and I know that it's coming up soon. I have evidence for it. It's not that I have to predict it in January that I'm going to need it in October. I can say in September, the initial indications are the data is not clean. I need to do something about that. Sorry, Ryan, you need to go to a different project, and we need a data engineer. I don't think Ryan's a data engineer himself. Anyway, pretend you aren't, Ryan, for a moment. If you are, we don't need Ryan on this one. We're going to move him to something else. We're going to bring a data engineer to this project because it's clear we need one. That's the kind of adjustment, just like going to a different planet in your starship, that you can make if you have the flexibility. If you lock yourself into an annual budget or even a quarterly one, you don't have the requisite flexibility to deal with an unexpected result, exactly like Ryan's describing. I did not pay Ryan to ask that question, by the way, but I'm really glad he did. So thanks, Ryan, for pointing that out. Okay, so I'm going to come to a few of the questions that I got up front. A number of you who signed up very helpfully asked great questions. I'm just going to pick a few of those. I never get to all of them on the forum, but if you want to come back to the forum and say, hey, Squirrel, you didn't deal with my question, I will always respond to that. But I'm going to pick out the ones that I think are exciting for today. And I try to come back and answer them, but I don't always get a chance to do that. Right. So, Barislav asks one that's not dissimilar from Ryan's. He says, what to do when the team is too small to handle the workload? You guessed wrong at the beginning. You did the Andy method and you got a little bit of it wrong, which is very normal and recoverable in the model we're describing. And there is no budget in money or time to hire and train more. Okay. So here's an important thing to understand about budgets. Budgets, and I got this from Alan Weiss, by the way, a very clever consultant. Budgets are simply resources. Money is a resource that you can move around. So is time. If somebody has given you a certain amount of time or a certain amount of budget for something, that is a changeable entity. The problem is we tend to treat it as if it was unchangeable. And a good example of this, by the way, is laws, right? So at a certain moment, it was illegal for you to drive a car down the road unless you had a person walking in front of it with a flag who was shouting, hey, car coming, hey, look out, because cars were new. They were frightening. People wanted to make sure that their horses wouldn't be spooked by a car. And so there was a person walking along with the flag. Now, you might have thought, if you were observing that that's a law. It's unchangeable. I can't do anything about it. Guess what people did? They drove their cars without the person walking along with a flag. Nobody died. The horses weren't spooked. They kind of got used to it. In fact, horses became less prevalent. And that law was changed pretty quickly once people figured out they could drive their cars a lot faster and a lot more people could have cars and you didn't need a horse. So laws feel like they are unchangeable. They're fixed. Oh, well, it's the law. I can't do anything. Yes, you can. You can change the law. And there are lots of different ways to do that, depending on what country you live in. You can elect somebody, you can bribe somebody. There are lots of ways to change what a law is. But the point of it is not as fixed as it seems to be. So, Berislav, my challenge to you is, first of all, can you adopt some of the methods that we're talking about so that you do not have a fixed budget in money or time? You're not locked into having Ryan on your team instead of a data engineer. You are actually able to shift. And even if the law says, oh, Berislav, you got your budget for the year, we can't add anything else. Guess you got to work weekends and midnight. You don't do that. Instead, what you do is you go back to somebody with the power. And there's always somebody, if you go high enough up, who has the power to move money and can say, we're going to stop spending money on this and we're going to start spending money on that. There's a great, I think it's a Joel Spolsky article. I can't remember what it was, but Spolsky was a very clever blogger about tech in the early days, in the early 2000s. And at one point, he figured out that the amount of money that the team spent on toilet paper for a year would be more expensive than the cost of additional hardware, additional space on their hard drives that they needed, because they were running out of space and having to delete stuff, and that was inconvenient and slowed them down. But the budget was set, here's your computer, it's got this much space on it, can't do anything about it. But if you go to somebody who's in charge of both toilet paper and hard drives, and you say, we should spend less on toilet paper and more on hard drives, that would be a good outcome. Guess what? We'll bring our own toilet paper, we'll do something else. There's some budget, there's something that people are spending on that they could shift to make more money from something else. And there are people with that power. If you go high enough in any organization, there's someone who can do that. Now, here's something that might be uncomfortable for you, Berislav. You might not know who that person is. You might not know where they live, what their name is. You might not know how it all works. Depending on how large your organization is, this can be quite daunting. And this is one you should ask more about on the forum. If you have this actual problem, this is one that we could all help you with. How do you navigate the corporate hierarchy to get to the right person? But even if you're stuck in a budget model that's rigid, it's really not as rigid as you think. And the laws can be changed so that, in fact, you can shift the money and time so that you can have the skill that you need and you can adjust to the real situation. Even better if you can plan for that, which is what I'm advocating here. So if you're the executive, if you're the one running the company, and you can decide to run things this way, I highly recommend doing so. If you're stuck more in the middle, try to find somebody who can at least shift it for you. Because there's somebody who's making a profit and loss decision, and they can say, no, toilet paper, get 1 ply, not 2 ply. Let's get some more hard drives for the engineers so we make more money. Right? There's someone who can make that economically rational choice, but it may not be you or your manager. Okay, Berislav, I hope that was helpful. Really challenging to you, I'm sure, but I'd love more questions about it. Let's see. What else do we have? Well, Mangla asks an interesting one, and Mangla puts it in terms of subscriptions, but I'm going to generalize it. So Mangla says, we pay for a lot of things, we get lost in the tech. How do we know what works? And should we go with a monthly subscription model? There's always new things. Well, first of all, monthly subscriptions can be canceled. Guess what? Even yearly subscriptions can be canceled. Again, a contract is not a law. It's not something that it's not a law of nature. It's more like a law of people. It's something that you can change. So you've signed a yearly contract, doesn't make sense. Talk to your vendor. See if you can get out of it. So can you pay half and get out? If it's not proving valuable to you and something else is more valuable, move the money. Don't think of it as fixed. But let me try to answer Mangla's more general question. How do we keep track? How do we know if things are actually working? I was just asked this question earlier today by a client. One of the most important things to do is to show working results. And I glided over this before Mangla's giving me a chance to say more about it. The very important thing, say in technology, but it applies everywhere, is being able to account for the business results of what you're doing. So we have a new capability in our software that allows our customers to bring on new users, and they can add a new user. And that's great because they pay us by the user, so we get more revenue. This is great. We've added it today. The thing we're going to do next is to advertise it so people can see it in the In the user interface, we're going to help sales to go and tell people about it. We're going to have customer service use it more frequently, and so on and so forth. So what you want to see is whenever you're completing a task, whenever the team is doing a thing that you would like to get a result from, it's a business result. And it's not, hey, we've added a new database table, we've added an index, we have some business logic over here, we have a deployment mechanism. Nobody pays for any of that. Nobody ever bought a database table. People buy the data that's in the database table. They buy the report that comes from the database table. They buy those things, talk about those things, and look for the results. So in Mango's case, if a monthly subscription you're getting has a business result, measure that and tell people what it is. It doesn't have to be a very precise measure. You could say something like, taking the toilet paper and hard drive example again, our engineers used to erase things and have to save space once a day. Now they have to do that once a year. You don't need a complex algorithm to figure out that that's going to save you a lot of money and the engineers a lot of time. That's very simple. And if you have that kind of analysis, it does not have to go farther than that. Mango, I hope that was helpful. Feel free to ask more. And I'm going to take one more of these questions. Let's see if I can find a good one here. Oh, there was somebody who was doubting me. Somebody gave me a really challenging one. Lester says, your description is pretty vague. I hope I've been more specific here, telling you precisely what to do, how to use the Andy method. But Lester, if I'm not doing it precisely enough for you, feel free to come back and argue with me. It doesn't sound like it's pitched towards Squirrel's regular clients who must pay the big bucks for his advice. Yes, my clients pay me a lot. I am definitely the Rolls Royce of consultants. I am not cheap. I've done it 300 times, so the advice is actionable and changes people's businesses radically in the way that I'm describing to you here. So Lester, thanks for the compliment. Yes, people pay me the big bucks. So am I broadening my audience to small businesses? Lester, I've been working with small businesses for a very, very long time. I worked in a number of startups, and startups apply these techniques that we're describing here better than most. It's the really large businesses that really have trouble implementing these kinds of mechanisms. And actually, this is pointed at all types of businesses, big and small. I've seen it work in all different areas. And Lester, you're bringing me on to my point that I said I'd come back to, which is how on earth do you do this inside a larger organization that's very rigid, right? And you may not have the leverage, you may not have the influence or the power to go and change that yourself. You could be like Berislav and try to get up the chain and see if you could actually change the model, at least for yourself. That's one way. But you can also run within a larger, very rigid organization, a piece of that organization in a much more flexible way. So that looks like this. What you do is you apply at the beginning of the year for your budget allocation, and it's fixed for the year. There's this crazy stuff where people like spend a lot right now just before Christmas. They have big Christmas parties, or they hire extra contractors or something because they got to use the money or they won't get it next year. Stupid, inefficient, really dumb, but still it happens in corporations, large, especially the most large ones, the largest ones. And so when you're operating within that model, you say, here's the budget I need. And what I need is a certain number of engineers, or I need a certain number of salespeople, and here's going to be my quota, and here's going to be the types of things I'm going to solve. You're going to try to make them as business focused as possible. See my earlier comments about the Andy method. You're looking for those business outcomes. I'm trying not to say, I'm going to build these 17 features that come right here out of my ticketing system that say how wide the button is going to be. You don't want to make that kind of commitment. And typically the larger business doesn't care that much about that. They're looking for a business result from you. They like that part, but they want a fixed amount of money and a fixed amount of time. And so what you give them, you give them that, but you say, you refuse to say, I'm going to hire this many people of exactly this skill. I'm going to assign them in exactly this way. I'm going to deliver this feature, this client, or this outcome in precisely this way. And if you can get away with this isn't easy necessarily. There are some challenges with doing it. But supposing you can do that, then the result is that you can then run your operation in the flexible Starship, beyond budgeting kind of way. So you then don't tell your team, hang on, I want you to tell me your complete roadmap and tell me how many engineers you need and show me everything and give me all the details. You tell them what's the business problem you're going to solve. Overall, we're solving this one. We're going to try to get into 12, take my client's example, we're going to get into 12 states this year. Which state are you doing? Okay, you're doing California. That's real tough. You're going to need a lot of resources. Okay, good. Come back in a week and tell me how far you're getting, right? Somebody else takes, I don't know, Rhode Island. Well, it's a little smaller. It's a little easier. So you get less resources, and we're going to monitor you in this way. We're going to keep track of how you move forward in Rhode Island. Maybe Rhode Island has crazy regulations. I have no idea. I've been there once, so can't tell you much about Rhode Island. But the point is that you can allocate the budget within your broader budget that you've got that's fixed. You can dole that out to the people within your team and the organization you work in a much more flexible starship-like manner. And that's a way to kind of operate in this more successful way within a kind of the shell of a larger budgeting process. So I hope that's helpful. Lester, please argue with me more. I'm enjoying your challenge. My goal wasn't to be vague, and I hope I've not been vague here for you. Let's see, what else do we have? There's Ryan here. I'm not sure if it's Ryan who's in the chat. Most orgs tend to budget for the entire year. How can I show them that switching to even a biannual budget can be beneficial and allow more experimentation? So this is what we talked about before. Come up with specific examples, and you guys said several good ones here in the chat. Have a look through, Ryan, and come up with your own. What are examples of unexpected changes? The sort of distress call from the other planet, if you do the Star Trek analogy. What are examples where that has come and burnt you before? And those are the kinds of things to cite and to say, hang on a second, this didn't work for us. It didn't make any sense for us to do it this way. And so when we did it the wrong way, we really got harmed. Why don't we do it the right way? Why don't we make our budget updated more frequently to avoid exactly this problem that cost us X? And if you can say, look, it cost us this much, and by the way, it would also mean that our budget gets done faster and is simpler and can be adjusted more frequently, that often can be a persuasive argument. And I like your gradual approach here. What you're not saying is, hey, how can I get them to change the budget every week? How can I get them to cancel the budget? You're saying, how can I get them to have like twice a year instead of once? Good start. And then that's the sort of thing you could build on. Hey, you know, we did twice a year last year. How about if we did 4 times a year this year? We could be even more flexible. I'll be more accountable, right? I can show you more progress. I hope that that's helpful. All right. So I would love more questions. Please keep putting in the chat. I'm not going to get to everything, but what people are asking is very good. I'm just going to ask you one more thing, which is and just to think about for yourselves, and that is, have you ever landed an airplane? And if you have ever landed an airplane, there's a tool inside the airplane that's very helpful. If you haven't landed one, don't worry, because I'm going to tell you about the tool. But it matches very nicely with what we're talking about here. And it matches nicely with something I don't have time to go into fully, but that's covered more on the forum. You can ask me more questions. I've written some descriptions of it and so on. So there's lots of material on this notion, which is called the glide path. And the glide path inside for an airplane is the path that you need to follow, and it looks kind of like this. Sort of slopes down to here, and then you land on the runway. Landing is kind of important for airplanes. You definitely want to get it right, in the same way that solving business problems is important for your survival in a business. Whether you're the executive or the person cleaning the floors, you better solve the different kinds of problems that you have at your level. If you don't solve real business problems, you're probably not going to be there very long. So the runway is the business problem you're solving, but there are lots of steps to get there. And what does not happen in an airplane, I can guarantee this, is that the pilot does not say, we will be at this altitude at exactly this moment, and then we will be at this altitude at exactly that moment, and we'll be on this. They have a notion of what the path looks like, but they do not predict exactly where they're going to be. If you want an analogy to something a little closer to home, for those of you who haven't landed an airplane, think about when you're driving. If you watch your hands, well, have somebody watch your hands. Watch somebody else's hands when they're driving, because I want you watching the road. But you'll notice their hands are always moving a little bit. And it's because you're always adjusting where you're going. Same thing happens in an airplane as you land. You're always going a little bit back, a little bit forward, a little bit forward, a little bit back. You're always adjusting where the plane is and what its altitude is. You do not plan, I'm going to be at this number of meters from my house, and then I'll be at this smaller number and this smaller number, and then I'm in my garage. You do not plan, I'm going to be at this altitude, that altitude, that altitude. You say, this is roughly what the shape is going to look like. And then you're frequently accountable. And that's what this tool is that I'm referring to. It's called a glide path indicator. It's a little circle like this. It has a picture of an airplane as if you were standing behind the airplane. It's got a picture from the back. and it shows you whether you're too high or too low. And it knows what the path ideally should be, and you're always adjusting. And that means you apply more resources, you speed up the engine, you slope downward, you put up the flaps, you put down the flaps, you do whatever you have to do to bring the airplane closer to the ideal position. And then it goes down a little bit. It's going to miss the runway. You're going to crash in the car park, and you go up. I got to get a little bit more here, and you move it back up. That's the position I'm advocating that you take. However you apply it, whether you apply it kind of in the radical version that I'm describing, that's in Beyond Budgeting and elsewhere, describing, Najib can correct me if I've got Beyond Budgeting wrong, but this is what I remember. You need a much greater flexibility, and you need more focus on business problems. You could either do it in that radical way, where you're really saying, look, I'm going to take off all the controls. I'm not going to try to predict where I'm going to be. I'm just going to be highly accountable, and I'm going to adjust my budget as I go. Or you could do kind of like what I talked about with Ryan and Lester, where you have a kind of shell around you and you have a fixed budget that's coming from the larger organization, and you apply these kinds of methods inside that. Either way, you're going to be constantly adjusting, and that means you're going to be more flexible and solve the problem better. And that's what I'm advocating. Now, you may believe that, like Cassandra, you're not going to listen to me and you're not going to try that. That's okay. That's up to you. But this is my Christmas present to you. Go and see whether you can apply these kinds of methods, these kinds of ideas in your organization, because I believe it'll make a huge difference for you. Nadja says the most radical way is using a sort of control chart, but not setting constraints to begin with. Exactly, and I remember that from Beyond Budgeting as well. A control chart like you use in a factory. Not just confirming this is where we're headed. I'm hoping that many of you will try this out, and I'd love to hear about how that works out for you. The best place to tell me about that is on the Squirrel Squadron forum. The website for that is right down here. I hope I'm pointing at the right thing, and would love for you to sign up if you aren't. So that you can make comments on these sorts of questions, ask questions about them, tell me I'm all wet, and have a debate about it, and get the ideas and input of thousands of people around the world who are struggling with the same problems, who are at the same executive level as you, and have very clever ideas. So I'd love to see you in this Squirrel Squadron. I'd love to see you at our future events coming in 2025. Watch the website and my emails for that. And I hope that all of you have an absolutely fantastic holiday season, whatever holiday you celebrate. Here in England, we tend to say Happy Christmas and Happy New Year. So I will wish that to all of you. Have a fantastic day, everyone. Thank you so much.